The floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse offered a panoramic view of Manhattan's glittering skyline. A perfect backdrop for the life Lucas and Elena had curated so meticulously. Yet the silence between them was loud enough to drown out the city below. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the suffocating quiet of a phone placed screen down on the marble counter, a notification light pulsing a rhythm that didn't match the beat of a faithful marriage. Lucas watched her hand tremble slightly as she reached for the wine glass, realizing that the woman sitting across from him was no longer his wife, but a stranger guarding a devastating secret. If you appreciate stories where the most dangerous scars are the ones you can't see, and revenge is a dish served not cold, but with absolute precision, stay with me because the house of cards is about to fall. The silence in the penthouse was structural, built into the walls like the steel beams that held the building 30 stories above the wet pavement of Tribeca. Lucas Vance sat at the head of the mahogany dining table, his reflection staring back at him from the darkened glass of the floor-to-ceiling window. Outside, New York was a blur of gray rain and amber streetlights, a chaotic mess that usually comforted him with its distance. Inside, the air was thin, pressurized. "You haven't touched your sea base," Elena said. Her voice was light, too light, carrying a forced casualness that grated against his nerves. Lucas looked up. His wife sat across from him, framed by the soft glow of the minimalist chandelier. She was beautiful, undeniably so. Sharp cheekbones, dark hair pulled back in a sleek chignon, wearing a silk blouse that cost more than most people's first cars. But tonight, she looked like a rendering of herself, a high-resolution image lacking depth. "I'm not hungry," Lucas replied, his voice steady. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the deep red liquid but not drinking. "Long day at the firm. The structural integrity on the Hudson project is compromised." Elena didn't catch the double meaning. She hummed in acknowledgement, her eyes already drifting down to the space beside her plate. Her phone lay there, face down on the cool marble. It had been vibrating intermittently for the last hour, short, sharp buzzes that sounded like insects trapped under glass. "Who is texting you at 9 on a Tuesday?" Lucas asked. He kept his tone mild, stripping it of accusation, leaving only curiosity. Elena's hand twitched. It was a micro-movement, a subtle flinch of the index finger, but Lucas saw it. He was an architect. His entire career was built on noticing the smallest stress fractures before the collapse. "Just work," she said, finally picking up her fork and pushing a piece of asparagus around her plate. "The PR team is in a crisis mode over the gala next week. Nora is panicking about the seating chart." "Nora usually emails," Lucas noted. "She's manic tonight," Elena said, dismissively. She took a sip of water, her eyes failing to meet his. "Why are you so interested in my phone, Lucas? You know how demanding the magazine gets." Lucas didn't answer immediately. He watched her. He watched the way her pulse jumped slightly in the hollow of her throat. He watched the way she angled her body slightly away from him, a subconscious defensive posture. 10 years. They had been married for 10 years. He knew the rhythm of her breathing, the way she took her coffee, the specific furrow of her brow when she was actually stressed about work. This wasn't work stress. This was adrenaline. This was the thrill of a secret. The phone buzzed again. This time the screen lit up briefly before the sensor dimmed it, casting a faint blue pallor onto the white tablecloth. It was upside down, but the vibration was aggressive, demanding. Elena's hand shot out, covering the device. "I should check that. It might be urgent." "Go ahead," Lucas said, leaning back in his chair. She hesitated, then slid the phone into her lap, out of his line of sight. The glow illuminated her chin from below. A small, almost imperceptible smile tugged at the corner of her lips before she suppressed it, replacing it with a mask of annoyance. "God, Nora is impossible," she muttered, typing rapidly. Lucas looked at his own reflection in the window again. He saw a man in a bespoke suit, composed, successful, sitting in a home he had designed to be a sanctuary. But looking at the ghost of his own face, he realized he was looking at a man whose foundation had already been dynamited. He just hadn't heard the explosion yet. He knew it wasn't Nora. Nora was currently in the Hamptons for her sister's wedding. She had posted a story on Instagram an hour ago, holding a martini, miles away from any seating chart crisis. Lucas cut a piece of the cold fish. The knife scraped against the porcelain, a harsh, screeching sound that made Elena look up, startled. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice tight. "Everything is fine," Lucas lied, meeting her gaze with a terrifying calmness. "I just realized I need to change the locks on the study. The mechanism is sticking." "Oh." Elena blinked, clearly relieved the topic wasn't her. "That's fine. Whatever you need to do." "Whatever I need to do," Lucas thought. He watched her type another reply, the secret smile returning, bolder this time. She thought she was safe. She thought he was the same predictable, safe Lucas she had married. She didn't realize that he was already drafting a new blueprint, one where she didn't exist in the final structure. At 2:14 a.m., the city of New York was a sprawling grid of dormant energy. But inside Lucas's study, the atmosphere was clinical, cold, and illuminated solely by the glow of 3 high-definition monitors. The rest of the penthouse was silent. Elena was asleep in the master bedroom down the hall. He had listened to her breathing settle into a rhythmic, untroubled cadence, and, hour ago, the deep sleep of someone who believed their secrets were safe. Lucas sat in his Aeron chair, his posture rigid. He didn't need a private investigator. He didn't need to skulk around corners in a trench coat. He was an architect. His mind was trained to look for discrepancies in patterns, for loads that didn't match the structural capacity. On the center screen, a spreadsheet was open. It was the joint American Express Platinum Statement. To the untrained eye, it was a list of luxury consumption: dinners at Le Cuckoo, spa treatments at the Mandarin Oriental, Uber rides across Manhattan. But Lucas saw the anomalies. He highlighted a row: the Greenwich Hotel, lobby bar, Thursday, 8:45 p.m. On that Thursday, Elena had told him she was at a late strategy meeting with the editorial board. He highlighted another: Uber trip, Tribeca to Soho, 11:30 p.m. Elena claimed she had taken a cab straight home from the office. Lucas zoomed in on the details. He cross-referenced the dates with her shared Google Calendar. The discrepancies were not random errors. They were structural flaws in the narrative of their marriage. They were intentional. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Then he opened a new tab. He didn't have a name yet, only a shadow. He navigated to Elena's iCloud account. They shared a family plan, a convenience they had set up years ago to sync photos of vacations and potential real estate investments. She had likely forgotten that the recent photos stream often synced automatically before being curated. He scrolled past the polished selfies and shots of brunch plates. And then, he found it. It wasn't a scandalous nude or an incriminating text. It was a photo of a hand holding a Scotch glass, resting on a knee clad in raw denim. In the background, out of focus but recognizable to anyone who knew the layout of the city's exclusive clubs, was the interior of Zero Bond. The metadata was dated 3 weeks ago. On the wrist of the hand holding the glass was a vintage Patek Philippe Nautilus. It was a watch Lucas had admired in a catalog once, rare and ostentatious. Lucas opened Instagram. He went to the tagged photos of the club for that night. It took him 20 minutes of sifting through influencer posts and blurry stories until he found a group shot. In the corner, laughing with his head thrown back, wearing that watch and those jeans, was a man. Lucas ran a reverse image search. The results populated instantly. Julian Thorne, venture capital, founder of Thorne Dynamics. Lucas stared at the face on the screen. Julian was everything Lucas was not. Where Lucas was precise, monochromatic, and contained, Julian looked chaotic and loud. He had the kind of rugged, unkempt charm that magazines sold as authentic. He was a man who disrupted markets and, apparently, marriages. A sharp, physical pain radiated from Lucas's chest, a dull ache that felt like a rib snapping. He closed his eyes for a brief second, imagining Elena with him. Imagining her laughing at Julian's jokes, perhaps mocking Lucas's obsession with order, his quiet nature, his predictability. He opened his eyes and exhaled slowly. The pain was irrelevant. The pain was a variable he couldn't control, so he removed it from the equation. He opened a secure folder on his private server, labeled simply Project V. He began downloading the bank statements, the geolocation data from the shared car service app, the screenshots of the social media posts. He compiled the evidence with the same meticulous attention to detail he applied to a skyscraper's foundation. Then, he opened the file that mattered most. The deed of trust. The penthouse wasn't technically owned by Lucas Vance or Elena Vance. It was the property of the Vance Family Trust, an entity established by his grandfather, of which Lucas was the sole trustee. The legal language was dense, archaic, and ironclad. Elena was a beneficiary only by virtue of marriage. He read Clause 14b, right of occupancy and revocation. Lucas leaned back, the blue light casting deep shadows in the hollows of his eyes. He wasn't going to scream. He wasn't going to break the monitors. He was going to dismantle her life, brick by brick, using the very laws she ignored. He saved the file. He turned off the monitors. The room plunged into darkness. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the sleeping city. He had the blueprint now. The demolition would be controlled. It would be slow, and it would be absolute. 3 weeks had passed since the night the notification light had fractured their marriage, and the penthouse had transformed into a theater. They were both actors now, reciting lines from a script that was rapidly being rewritten. For Elena, the performance was one of agitation. Guilt, Lucas observed, rarely manifested as remorse in people like his wife. Instead, it curdled into irritation. She needed him to be the villain. She needed him to be boring, stifling, and unworthy, so that her betrayal could be reframed as a necessary escape rather than a moral failing. It was Tuesday evening, and they were preparing for the Met's donor dinner. The bedroom smelled of hairspray and the heavy, musky wood of Elena's perfume. A new scent, Lucas noted. Julian's preference, perhaps. Lucas stood by the dresser, adjusting his cufflinks. He caught Elena watching him in the mirror. Her expression wasn't affectionate. It was critical, dissecting. "Are you wearing the gray suit?" she asked, her voice laced with a fatigue that seemed disproportionate to the question. "It makes you look so washed out, Lucas. So invisible." "It's appropriate for the occasion," Lucas replied evenly, not turning around. "Conservatism is expected from the board." Elena scoffed, a sharp sound that hung in the air. "That's your problem, isn't it? Everything is always so appropriate, so safe." Don't you ever want to just burn something down, make a splash? She wasn't talking about the suit. She was talking about Julian Thorne, the venture capitalist who drove vintage Porsches and likely spoke to her about disrupting paradigms. Lucas fastened the cufflink, the gold clicking softly. I prefer things that last, Elena. Stability has its own value. She turned away, grabbing her clutch with unnecessary force. God, you sound like a textbook. It's suffocating. Lucas absorbed the insult without flinching. This was part of the process. The more she villainized him, the more reckless she became. Before we go, Lucas said, reaching into his inner jacket pocket. He pulled out a slender document folder. I need you to sign the annual tax restructuring papers for the estate. My accountant wants them filed before the quarter ends. Elena paused at the door, her hand on the frame. She looked back, her eyes narrowing slightly. In the past, she might have read them, but lately she couldn't be bothered with the minutiae of their shared life. She wanted out of the room, out of the conversation, and into the night where she could feel alive. Now? We're going to be late, she snapped. It will take 10 seconds. Just standard asset reallocation to the trust to minimize liability. The usual. Lucas held out a fountain pen. Elena sighed, a dramatic exhale of suffering. She marched over, snatched the pen, and scribbled her signature on the flagged pages without reading a single line of the text above. She didn't notice that the reallocation was actually a total divestment of her marital interest in the Tribeca property, converting her status from joint tenant to guest under the specific bylaws of the Vance family trust. She handed the pen back, her eyes already drifting to her phone. Happy? Very, Lucas said, sliding the documents back into the folder. He felt a cold thrill of victory, sharper and more potent than any anger. Thank you for trusting me with the details. Someone has to be the bore, she muttered, opening the door. The ride to the museum was silent. Elena spent the entire journey texting, tilting her screen away from him. Lucas looked out the window as the city streamed by. He wasn't the boring husband anymore. He was the architect who had just removed the load-bearing wall of her future, and she was the one who had signed off on the demolition order. When they arrived, Elena immediately brightened, putting on her public face, the charming, successful wife. She took his arm as they walked past the paparazzi, her grip tight, possessive. It was a lie for the cameras. Lucas smiled for the flashbulbs. He could play the part. He could be the invisible man in the gray suit. Because he knew something no one else did. The lock on the penthouse door was already changing, the tumblers shifting into a new combination that only he possessed. The loft in Soho smelled of roasted coffee beans and expensive leather, the kind of raw, industrial chic that Julian Thorne curated as effortlessly as his stock portfolio. It was midday, a Tuesday, the time when Lucas believed Elena was reviewing layout proofs for the September issue. Instead, she was watching Julian pace the length of his living room, a tumbler of whiskey in his hand despite the hour. I'm tired of the schedule, Elena, Julian said, stopping in front of the window that overlooked Broome Street. He didn't look at her. Tuesday afternoons, Thursday nights if he has a board meeting. It feels collegiate. I'm not a college student hiding in a dorm room. Elena sat on the edge of the sprawling velvet sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. It's complicated, Julian. You know the assets involved, the optics. Julian turned, his expression hard. The optics? You're the art director of Vogue Living. You create the optics. You can spin anything. He walked over to her, his voice softening, a calculated shift that always disarmed her. He knelt, placing a hand on her knee. The heat of his palm seeped through her dress. He doesn't see you, Elle. He sees an accessory to his perfect, sterile life. I see you, but I won't share you with a ghost anymore. The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and intoxicating. It was what she wanted to hear, that she was a prize worth demanding. Lucas never demanded. He only expected. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "End it," Julian said, his thumb stroking the inside of her thigh. "Before the gala. Walk in there on my arm, not his. Make him leave. Keep the apartment. It's yours by right of suffering through 10 years of boredom, isn't it?" Right of suffering. The phrase stuck with her. 2 hours later, Elena sat at a corner table at Le Bilboquet on the Upper East Side, surrounded by the chatter of socialites and the clinking of crystal. Across from her sat Sophie and Clara, two women whose loyalty was dictated by whoever held the most interesting gossip. Elena took a sip of her Sancerre, her face composed into a mask of weary sadness. "I don't know how much longer I can take it," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. Sophie leaned in, her eyes widening with predatory interest. "Is it Lucas? He seemed so attentive at the fundraiser." "Attentive?" Elena let out a hollow laugh. "It's control, Sophie. It's suffocating. He tracks my car. He questions every receipt. Last week he yelled at me because I bought a new dress without consulting the budget. Can you imagine? I make my own money, yet I feel like a child in my own home." It was a lie. Lucas had never yelled about a dress. He had never tracked her car until she gave him a reason to. But the lie tasted sweet. It absolved her. As she spoke, she began to believe it herself. She wasn't the adulterous wife. She was the victim of a tyrannical, emotionally stunted architect. "That's financial abuse, plain and simple," Clara declared, nodding solemnly as she stabbed a piece of tuna tartare. "You shouldn't have to live like that, especially in your house." "He just won't leave," Elena said, a tear, genuine in its frustration, if not its origin, welling in her eye. "He's so attached to that penthouse. It's his trophy case." "Then you make him leave," Sophie said, her voice steel. "Kick him out. Change the locks. Possession is 9/10 of the law, darling. If he's that controlling, you need to blindside him before he locks you down." Elena looked at her friends, absorbing their validation. They were giving her permission. They were handing her the moral high ground on a silver platter. Julian was right. Lucas was weak. He was just a man in a gray suit who checked the locks, but forgot to check the woman inside. She finished her wine, a cold resolve settling in her chest. She wouldn't just leave. She would evict him. She would take the narrative, the house, and the future, and she would leave Lucas with nothing but his precious blueprints. The storm that had been threatening the eastern seaboard all week finally broke over Manhattan at dusk. By 10 p.m., rain was lashing against the panoramic windows of the penthouse, turning the city lights into smeared, weeping streaks of neon. The sound was a constant, low-frequency drone that filled the silence of the living room where Lucas sat. A single architectural journal open on his lap, unread. He heard the elevator doors slide open. Then the click of Elena's heels on the foyer marble. Sharp, staccato, aggressive. She didn't call out a greeting. She didn't hang up her coat. She walked straight into the living room, bringing the smell of damp wool and static electricity with her. Lucas looked up. Elena stood in the center of the room, her silhouette framed by the storm raging behind her. Her eyes were bright, too bright, dilated with a mixture of adrenaline and the liquid courage she'd likely consumed with Julian. She looked like someone who had rehearsed a speech in the mirror 100 times and was terrified she might forget the lines if she didn't say them immediately. "We need to talk," she said. It wasn't a request. "I'm listening," Lucas replied, closing the journal calmly. Elena paced a tight circle, her hands balling into fists. "I can't do this anymore, Lucas. This charade. Living in this mausoleum with you. It's suffocating me. I feel like I'm dying by inches every day I wake up next to you." Lucas watched her performance with a detached fascination. He noted the scripted nature of her words, phrases undoubtedly fed to her by Julian or her echo chamber of friends. "I wasn't aware you were so unhappy," he lied softly. "Because you never look," she snapped, her voice rising. "You're obsessed with your buildings, your legacy, your precious order. You don't see people, Lucas. You see functions, and I'm done functioning for you." She stopped pacing and turned to face him, her chest heaving. This was the moment, the crescendo. "I want a divorce," she declared. The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. "I see," Lucas said. Didn't stand up. He didn't raise his voice. His stillness seemed to infuriate her further. "I'm not leaving, Lucas," she continued, her voice gaining a jagged edge. "This is my home. I've put 10 years of my life into this marriage, into this image you wanted. I've earned this place. I've spoken to people. I know my rights." She took a breath, steeling herself, and then delivered the blow she believed would crush him. "Pack your bags and leave," she demanded, pointing a trembling finger toward the bedroom. "Tonight. I want you out. I need space to breathe, and I can't do it with you hovering over me like a ghost." The thunder rumbled outside, shaking the glass in its frames. Lucas looked at his wife, really looked at her. He saw the fear behind the arrogance. She was terrified he would fight her. She was terrified he would remind her that the deed was in a trust, that her name was no longer on the title, that she had signed away her leverage with a Mont Blanc pen 3 weeks ago. But if he fought now, she would lawyer up. She would dig in. The war would be long and messy. Lucas stood up slowly. Elena flinched, taking a half-step back, expecting rage. Instead, Lucas's face was a mask of resigned defeat. He slumped his shoulders slightly, a physical affectation of a broken man. "If that is what you truly want, Elena," he said, his voice low, "if I am the source of your unhappiness, then I will go." Elena blinked, stunned. The wind went out of her sails. She had braced for a screaming match, for a battle. His surrender was disorienting, but relief quickly washed over her features, replaced by a smug sense of power. She had won. It was easier than Julian said it would be. "It is," she said, regaining her composure, lifting her chin. "It's for the best. For both of us." "I'll pack a bag for the hotel," Lucas said, turning toward the bedroom. "I'll have the rest moved out later." "Tomorrow," she corrected him sharply. "I want everything out by tomorrow. I'm having people over. I want a fresh start." "Understood," Lucas said. He walked past her, close enough to smell the faint trace of Julian's cologne clinging to her hair. He walked into the bedroom and pulled his suitcase from the closet. As he folded his shirts with methodical precision, he wasn't thinking about loss. He was thinking about the timing. She wanted him out tonight. Good. That meant the apartment would be empty tomorrow morning when she left for work. He zipped the suitcase. The sound was like a zipper on a body bag. "Goodbye, Elena," he said 10 minutes later, standing at the door with his bag. She didn't look up from her phone. She was already texting the good news. "Leave the keys on the console," she said dismissively. Lucas placed his set of keys on the marble table. The metal clicked against the stone. A final sound. He walked out into the hallway and pressed the elevator button. As the doors closed, shutting off the view of his wife and his home, Lucas checked his watch. 10:45 p.m. The demolition was scheduled to begin at 9 a.m. sharp. The morning sun hit the pavement of Greenwich Street with a deceptive brilliance, washing the city in a clean, sharp light that betrayed nothing of the storm from the night before. Lucas sat by the window of the corner cafe, a double espresso untouched in front of him. From this vantage point, he had a direct line of sight to the entrance of his building. At 8:45 a.m., the heavy brass doors swung open. Elena stepped out. She looked radiant. She was wearing a cream-colored trench coat and oversized sunglasses, her step light and bouncy. It was the walk of a woman who believed she had just cleared the rubble from her life. She stopped briefly to check her reflection in a shop window, adjusted her scarf, and then hailed a cab. She didn't look back at the building. She didn't need to. In her mind, she owned it. Lucas waited until the yellow taxi disappeared into the flow of traffic on West Broadway. Then, he picked up his phone and dialed a number he had saved under contractors. Security. "It's time," Lucas said. "Meet me in the lobby in 5 minutes." He left a $20 bill on the table and walked across the street. The doorman, Henry, tipped his cap as Lucas approached. Henry had worked there for 15 years. He knew who paid the holiday bonuses, and more importantly, he knew whose name was on the master deed. "Good morning, Mr. Vance," Henry said, his eyes flicking momentarily to the empty space where Elena had just stood. "Mrs. Vance left just a moment ago." "I know, Henry," Lucas said, his voice calm. "There are going to be some changes regarding access protocols today. I've emailed the management office the updated trust documents. From this moment forward, Mrs. Vance is not to be admitted to the elevators without my express authorization." Henry paused, his professional mask slipping for a fraction of a second before he nodded solemnly. "Understood, sir. I'll inform the desk." Lucas took the elevator up alone. The ride was smooth, silent. When the doors opened directly into the penthouse foyer, the space felt different. It felt compromised. The locksmith was already there, having come up the service elevator as arranged. He was a man of few words, carrying a heavy tool bag. "Front entry and service entrance?" the locksmith asked. "Both," Lucas replied. "High-security Medeco cylinders. And I need the biometric keypad wiped and reset to factory defaults immediately." While the drill whirred, cutting through the metal with a violent, high-pitched screech, Lucas walked into the living room. It was exactly as he had left it the night before, but now, stripped of the emotional haze, he saw it clearly. He walked to the smart home control panel on the wall. He entered the master admin code, a code Elena had never bothered to learn because she found technology tedious. User, Elena V, status, active, action, delete. The screen flashed red for a moment, then green. User removed. Next, he pulled out his phone and opened the banking app for the joint account, the one funded entirely by his firm but accessible to her. He navigated to the card section. Platinum card ending in 4098. He tapped Report Lost, Stolen, and then Freeze Account. The notification appeared instantly. Card suspended. Somewhere in the city, Elena was likely ordering a celebratory mimosa or buying a new dress for her fresh start. When she tried to pay, the chip would decline. A small inconvenience, she would think. A glitch. The sound of the drill stopped. "All done, Mr. Vance," the locksmith called out. "New keys are on the counter. System is rebooted." Lucas walked back to the foyer. He picked up the new key. It was heavy, cool to the touch. He looked at the pile of Louis Vuitton luggage stacked neatly by the wall. He had called a private packing service an hour ago to box up her immediate essentials. Clothes, toiletries, shoes. No sentimental items. Just the inventory of a tenant being evicted. "Take these down to the lobby," Lucas instructed the movers who had just arrived. "Leave them with the concierge. Tell him they are for collection." When the apartment was finally empty of people, Lucas stood in the center of the foyer. He looked at the door. He stepped outside into the hallway and pulled it shut. The latch clicked. It was a solid, final sound, the sound of a vault closing. He tested the handle. Locked. Lucas didn't feel happy. He didn't feel sad. He felt the precise, cold satisfaction of a structural engineer who had successfully corrected a critical failure. The building was secure. Now he just had to wait for the storm to return. It was just past 6 in the evening when Elena returned to Tribeca. The day had been intoxicating. Lunch with Julian had stretched into late afternoon drinks, where they had toasted to liberation and new chapters. She felt light, untethered, and powerful. The credit card decline at the bistro, which forced Julian to pick up the check, was a minor annoyance she attributed to a fraud alert system glitch. It didn't dampen her spirits. She breezed through the heavy glass doors of the lobby, her heels clicking authoritatively on the polished stone. She didn't look at the concierge desk. She simply headed straight for the private elevator bank that serviced the penthouses. She pulled her key fob from her purse and tapped it against the sensor. Instead of the soft, affirmative beep and the green light, the panel flashed a harsh, angry crimson. A low, dissonant tone buzzed. Elena frowned, tapping it again. Harder this time. "Come on," she muttered. Red. Access denied. She punched in her 4-digit override code on the keypad. Invalid entry. "Is there a system outage?" she called out, turning toward the desk. Her voice laced with the impatience of a woman who expects the world to part for her. Henry, the head doorman, was already standing behind her. He wasn't smiling. Usually, Henry was a fixture of benign service, a man who held umbrellas and opened doors. Now, he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his posture rigid, blocking the path back to the entrance. "There is no outage, Mrs. Vance," Henry said quietly. The lobby was empty, but the echo made his voice sound strangely amplified. "Then fix the elevator," Elena snapped. "I've had a long day and I need to get upstairs." "I'm afraid I can't do that," Henry replied. He didn't make eye contact, focusing instead on a point over her shoulder. "Mr. Vance has updated the building's security protocols. Your fob has been deactivated. You are no longer on the approved access list for the penthouse." Elena laughed. It was a sharp, incredulous sound. "Excuse me? I live here. My husband, my ex-husband, moved out last night. I kicked him out." "Mr. Vance is the sole deed holder and trustee," Henry recited, as if reading from a script. "He has exercised his right to revoke guest privileges. He left instructions that you are not to proceed past the lobby." "Guest privileges?" The words hit her like a physical slap. "I am his wife." "Not according to the paperwork filed with the board this morning," Henry said gently, finally meeting her eyes. There was no mockery in his gaze, only a professional pity that was infinitely worse. He gestured toward the far corner of the lobby, near the package room. "Your personal effects have been brought down, ma'am." Elena followed his hand. There, stacked neatly on a luggage cart, were her Louis Vuitton suitcases, the ones she had packed for vacations in Saint-Tropez and Aspen. Beside them were 2 cardboard boxes sealed with tape. Her breath hitched in her throat. The world tilted slightly on its axis. This wasn't happening. This was a nightmare. She walked over to the cart, her legs feeling numb. Resting on top of the highest suitcase was a thick manila envelope with her name on it. Elena. No last name. She ripped it open, her fingers trembling so violently she nearly dropped the contents. Inside wasn't a handwritten letter of apology or a plea for reconciliation. It was a legal document, petition for dissolution of marriage. Stapled to the back was a smaller stack of papers, printouts of text messages, a timeline of hotel visits, and a high-resolution photo of her and Julian entering the Soho loft, time-stamped. The air in the lobby felt suddenly thin, insufficient to fill her lungs. She looked at the elevator doors, impenetrable steel barriers. She looked at Henry, who had retreated to his desk, studiously ignoring her. She pulled out her phone to call Lucas. She would scream at him. She would threaten him. She would burn the building down. Call failed. She stared at the screen. She tried again. Call failed. It wasn't just the locks, the family phone plan. He had cut the line. Panic, cold and sharp, began to rise in her chest, displacing the anger. She looked at her luggage, then at the darkening street outside. She had nowhere to go. The apartment she had claimed as her trophy was a fortress, and she was on the outside. "Do you need a taxi called, ma'am?" Henry asked from across the room, his voice neutral. Elena stood amidst her luggage, the envelope of her sins clutched in her hand. The reflection in the glass door showed a woman who looked expensive, polished, and utterly homeless. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Call me a taxi." 30 days was enough time for dust to settle, but not enough for the air to clear. In the penthouse, the silence had returned, but it was no longer the heavy, pressurized silence of secrets. It was the sterile, acoustic silence of a vacuum. Lucas stood on the balcony, the wind whipping at his shirt sleeves. The legal proceedings had been swift, brutal, and surgically precise. The ironclad trust fund and the undeniable evidence of infidelity had left no room for negotiation. The lawyers called it a clean break. Lucas looked at the empty space on the living room wall where a massive abstract painting, one Elena had picked out, used to hang. He had it removed yesterday. The wall was white, pristine, and blank. It looked like a fresh sheet of drafting paper. He took a sip of his scotch. He had won. He had kept the building, the assets, the reputation, but as he looked out over the city, he felt a strange, hollow ache in his chest. It wasn't regret. He knew he had done what was necessary, but it was the fatigue of a man who had been forced to demolish his own home to save the foundation. 5 miles away, across the bridge in a cramped sublet in Long Island City, the view was different. Elena sat on a second-hand sofa that smelled faintly of someone else's cigarettes. The window looked out onto a brick wall and a fire escape. Her phone sat on the coffee table, silent. She checked the time. 8:30 p.m. Julian was supposed to be here an hour ago. She picked up the phone and typed a message. "Are you still coming? I made reservations." She watched the 3 dots appear, then disappear, then appear again. Finally, a reply. "Running late. Crazy day at the market." "Let's rain check?" Elena stared at the screen. A month ago, he would have crossed the city in a storm just to touch her hand. Now she was available, unburdened, and entirely his. And he was running late. She realized then, with a nausea that curled in her gut, that she had never been the destination for Julian. She had been the vacation, and vacation's end. She looked around the small apartment. The heating rattled. The neighbor upstairs was walking with heavy steps. Her designer clothes were jammed into a closet too small to hold them, looking ridiculous and out of place in this setting. She thought of the penthouse. She thought of Lucas. Boring, steady, predictable Lucas. The man who checked the locks. The man who ensured the foundation was solid. She had traded a fortress for a tent in the wind, convinced that the breeze felt like freedom. Back in Tribeca, Lucas turned away from the view. He walked into his study and sat at his desk. He opened his laptop. On the screen was a new project file. It was a design for a single-family home in upstate New York, something made of stone and timber, secluded, far from the noise of the city. A place for one. He minimized the window and opened his contact list. He scrolled down to Elena. For a moment, his finger hovered over the trackpad. He remembered the first year of their marriage. He remembered the way she used to look at him before the resentment set in. He remembered the smell of her hair. Then he remembered the look on her face when she told him to pack his bags. Lucas pressed delete. "Are you sure you want to delete this contact?" He clicked, "Yes." He closed the laptop. The room was dark, save for the city lights bleeding in from outside. He wasn't happy. He wasn't whole. But he was safe. Lucas Vance walked out of the study and turned off the lights, leaving the room in darkness. He walked to the front door, checked the deadbolt, a habit he would never break, and went to bed. The lock held. The architect slept. And outside, the city continued to spin, indifferent to the hearts it broke and the designs it ruined.